Find a comfortable position. Let your body settle without hurry. There is nowhere to go now and nothing you need to hold in place. The day can remain exactly as it is for a little while longer. The light does not need to soften all at once. The warmth does not need to leave. You only need to let yourself arrive here, one quiet moment at a time. Today's story is called An Easy Sleep in the Shade of the Olive Grove. The path has been bright for long enough that your eyes no longer try to measure it. It lies pale beneath your feet, sun-warmed and lightly powdered with dust, running in a quiet line between low stone borders and open stretches of dry ground where the heat has settled and stayed. Nothing harsh comes from it, nothing difficult, only the steady presence of midday, broad and clear around you, as though the whole afternoon has opened itself fully and has no reason to be anything other than what it is. Your steps have already grown slower without your needing to decide that they should. The warmth resting on your shoulders is simple and even. It has found the backs of your arms, the bridge of your nose, the upper curve of your chest where the light reaches it, and it stays there in the easy way sunlight does when the day is well past its beginning and has no urgency left in it. The ground gives back a little of that stored warmth. The stones along the edge of the path hold it more quietly. Even the air seems to have been standing in it for hours, carrying no rush, no coolness, no suggestion that anything is about to change. Ahead, the olive grove waits, not at the end of the path in any dramatic way. Not hidden, not distant, not discovered suddenly after a long walk. It has been there for some time already, keeping its own place in the afternoon while you come towards it gradually. A wide gathering of old trees, silver green at their highest edges where the light catches the leaves, darker underneath where the branches have been making shade. From here, they do not look dense. They look settled, spaced apart with the easy certainty of things that have had many years to stand exactly where they belong. The line between the open brightness and the first shade is still a little way ahead, but your body has begun to sense it before you reach it. That is how these places work in the middle of a warm day. Relief begins before contact. The eye notices it first in the way the ground darkens beneath the outer branches, where the hard brightness of the path breaks into patches and moving pieces. Then the skin seems to know as well. The light on your arms remains warm, but somewhere ahead the day has another register waiting inside it. Not colder, not dim, only quieter, held closer to the ground, folded beneath leaves that turn the full sun into something gentler. You keep walking at the same unforced pace. The path curves slightly, enough that the grove seems to widen as you approach, one old trunk appearing more clearly beside another, their bark pale in some places, deepened in others, each tree carrying its own slow shape upward into leaves that flash silver for a second when they turn, and then settle back into muted green again. Nothing flickers sharply. The movement is too small for that. The leaves merely answer the light in brief, quiet ways, as though the afternoon were touching them, and they were acknowledging it without needing to do more. On either side of the path, the open ground lies dry and still, a little rough in places, sparse with low growth close to the earth. Here and there a stone sits half set into the dust. Farther off, the brightness rests over everything evenly enough that details soften before you reach them. The open air feels wide, but not empty. It carries the fullness of a day already well established in itself. Insects somewhere beyond clear sight, their sound too thin to separate yet. Heat rising, so lightly from the ground that it is felt more than seen. The kind of held silence that exists not because nothing is there, but because everything present has agreed not to disturb the hour. You let one foot fall, and then the next. There is no need to arrive quickly. The grove is not going anywhere. Its shade has already lasted through the earlier part of the day, and it will remain where it is while the afternoon leans on. That knowledge changes something small in the body, not enough to call it an emotion, more a loosening of pace from inside the muscles themselves. The shoulders no longer carry the idea of distance. The jaw is no longer holding the brightness in place. Even the eyes stop reaching ahead in the busy way they sometimes do when they are still half preparing for what comes next. What comes next is only shade, only trees, only the quiet difference between one part of the day and another. The first branch shadow reaches the path before the grove itself fully surrounds it. At first, it lies thinly across the dust, hardly more than a soft gray interruption in the pale ground, a shape that shifts as the leaves above move, and then joins other shapes until the path is no longer one broad band of light, but a braided surface of brightness and shelter, sun and pattern, warm earth and cooler looking dust. You step through one strip of shadow and back into light again, then another. The change is delicate, almost too slight to name, yet the skin notices it at once. The sun no longer lies on you in one unbroken sheet. It arrives in pieces now, between leaves, across the forearm, at the edge of the shoulder, over the top of one hand, and then gone again. A breath comes more deeply, not because you ask it to, only because the air beneath the first outer branches seems easier to receive. The muscles behind the knees soften a little. The back of the neck lets go of some small effort it had forgotten it was making. None of this announces itself. It happens in the ordinary way comfort does when it is real, quietly, almost shyly, without trying to be noticed. You walk on beneath a little more shade. Now the light above is no longer one full blaze of summer white, but a layered brightness moving through leaves narrow enough to let it pass in shards and softened strips. The ground changes with it. Dust remains and pale stones remain, but there are also dry leaf fragments, olive leaves fallen, and curled a little at the edges, the fine imprint of roots lifting shallowly under the surface here. And there, the darkened patches where shade has been resting longer. Your steps register these changes without needing to inspect them. The soles of your feet understand the difference. The path is still there, but it belongs less to the open field now and more to the trees. Somewhere beyond the grove, where the land is still fully in the sun, a faint thread of insect hum begins to separate itself from the quiet. It stays at a distance. The sound does not belong to the place you are entering in the same way the brightness behind you does. It belongs to the afternoon outside the shade, to the warmer air held over dry ground beyond the trees. Here, under the olives, it arrives already softened, as though the branches and silver leaves have taken its sharper edge away before letting it travel in. It is only a thread, a reminder that the heat is still there beyond the grove, continuing with its own life in the open places while you step farther into another rhythm. The path narrows slightly, not enough to make you careful, only enough that your attention gathers closer to where you are. One trunk stands to the left, wide at the base, its bark dry and folded into old vertical lines. Another stands farther ahead on the right, with a lower branch turning outward before lifting again. Between them, the shade gathers more fully, not dark, not cool in any dramatic sense, only deeper, steadier, less interrupted by the open day beyond. The leaves overhead have that silver-backed quality olive trees carry, so beautifully in strong light. Every so often, one small turn of the branch shows the underside of a cluster, and a pale sheen glances through above you and is gone. You pass fully out of the broadest stretch of open sun. The difference is immediate, though still gentle. Warmth remains in your clothes and on your skin, carried in with you from the path. The air under the trees does not remove it. It simply stops adding to it. The shoulders no longer feel the full weight of the day's brightness. The top of the head is no longer directly exposed. The eyes begin to rest in a softer field, where not everything asks to be seen at once. Shade lies in moving sections across the ground, and the spaces between trunks make rooms of the grove without walls, each one held by branches and leaf light and old bark, each one as unhurried as the next. You slow again, not because there is anything difficult underfoot, not because you are deciding where to go, only because the grove makes quickness unnecessary. That is one of the oldest comforts in the world, a place that changes your pace before you have quite realized it has done so. Your breathing settles into that new pace. The chest lifts and falls more easily. The steps themselves no longer carry the small forward lean of getting somewhere. They become level, even, almost companionable with the ground. As you move between the trees, the sunlight left outside the grove begins to seem farther away than it is. You could turn your head and still see the brighter opening between trunks, the pale path continuing through the day beyond, the open stretch of light lying undisturbed where you have just come from. But already it feels like the outer layer of the afternoon, while this, here beneath the olives, is something inside it. The grove is not silent. A leaf turns somewhere above and answers the light with a brief, soft shift. A dry fragment underfoot gives a small sound and is done. The far insect hum goes on outside the denser shade. Once, from somewhere well beyond the trees, a faint movement of air stirs through the higher branches, not strong enough to be called a breeze, only enough to let a few leaves answer one another in quiet sequence before returning to stillness. None of these sounds stay long enough to become events. They pass through the edges of the place and leave its calm intact. You move farther in. The trunks are set apart generously, and that spacing changes the feel of the grove completely. This is not a narrow wood, not a close green tunnel. The shade here is made from distance as much as from leaves. There is room between the trees for light to travel, room for the ground to remain visible, room for the afternoon to continue breathing through the branches without ever becoming exposed again. It feels old in the way open old places do, confident enough in itself not to crowd what enters. Ahead, and a little to one side, a broader tree begins to make itself known, though not yet as a destination. Its trunk is wider than the others nearby, lifting from the earth with the kind of base that has held its place for a very long time. The shade beneath it falls more continuously, with fewer bright interruptions touching the ground. Around its roots, the earth looks smoother in some places, more settled, less broken. Nothing about it calls attention to itself. It simply holds the space around it more fully than the others do. You do not go to it at once. There is no abrupt recognition, no moment of choosing that breaks the quiet mood of the walk. Instead, you find yourself angling towards it in the same simple way you had already angled towards the shade when the grove was still ahead on the path. Ease knows its own direction long before it explains itself. One step comes, then another. The branches above this part of the grove draw the light into finer pieces. The ground beneath carries a steadier pattern of shadow. The sense of being inside something held and long established deepens without effort. By now, the brightness behind you has thinned into glimpses between trunks. It is still there, but it no longer asks anything of you. The path that brought you here continues somewhere beyond the nearest opening, pale and warm and undisturbed in the sun, but already it has become part of the outer frame of the day. Here, farther inside the grove, the afternoon has another center. It lies lower, closer to the earth, filtered through leaves, resting along bark, set into the ground beneath the trees in layers of light and shade that move too gently to keep track of for long. You notice, too, that your hands have become quieter. No lingering tension in the fingers, No small readiness left in the wrists. The shoulders hang in their natural place now. The face has softened out of its brighter expression. Even the space behind the eyes feels less active, as though the day no longer has to be held at full distance. Shade does that work for you. It receives what was broad and open and makes it easier to inhabit. The old tree ahead remains where it is, steady in its own deeper patch of afternoon. Not hidden, not announced, simply present. Its trunk rises from the dry earth with a certain unarguable calm. There is a place beside it where the ground seems more even, where shade rests with fewer interruptions, where the patterned light above arrives gently enough that it would not trouble closed eyes. You have not reached it yet, but some quieter part of you has already understood what the mind is only beginning to say in words, that the walking part of the afternoon is nearly done. A few more steps carry you through a shifting screen of leaf shadow. The light on the ground grows softer in its edges. The insects remain only a low thread beyond the trees. The open day, warm and pale and unhurried, continues outside the grove exactly as it should. But from here, it already feels held at a distance by trunks, branches, and the silver turning of leaves overhead. You come nearer to the broad tree. The earth at its base looks gently used by shade, as though the hours have been collecting there quietly since morning. One root rises just enough to give shape to the ground before disappearing back beneath it. The bark carries dry folds and old stillness. Above, the leaves filter the light into a patient pattern that moves without insisting on being watched. The pace slows once more. Breath settles lower. Something in you recognizes that there will be no need to go farther than this. And there, within the grove where the brightness has already been left behind, with the old tree waiting in its own steady patch of shade, and the afternoon holding itself softly on every side, you arrive at the edge of rest. You go on beneath the trees without any feeling of having left one world for another all at once. The change has already happened. It continues quietly now, not as a crossing, but as a deepening. The farther you move into the grove, the less the open afternoon arranges itself around you, and the more the place beneath the olive branches begins to set its own measure. It does not close in. That is one of the first things you notice without trying to. There is room here, room between trunks, room for the ground to show itself, room for light to travel in narrow, shifting pieces through the leaves and rest where it falls before moving on again. The shade is real, but it is not dense. It lets the day remain visible while changing the way it is felt. You pass one tree and then another. Each stands apart with the natural interval of something that has never needed to crowd what grows beside it. Their trunks are shaped by time more than symmetry, some rising almost straight before dividing, some turning low and then lifting again, some broad at the base with bark drawn into dry folds that catch a little pale light on the outer ridges and hold dimmer tones in the deeper lines between. Nothing in them asks to be admired. They are too settled for that. They simply keep their places, old enough to seem less like planted things than part of the ground itself. The earth beneath them has its own quiet variety. In one place it lies pale and open under a thinner pattern of leaves. In another, it is darker where the shade remains longer and the surface holds less of the day's brightness. Small fallen leaves lie scattered here, and there, narrow and curled, not enough to soften the ground, only enough to mark that the branches above have been slowly answering the seasons in their own time. Here and there, a root draws a line just beneath the surface, making the earth rise and fall by small degrees. Elsewhere, the ground settles flatter, more level, with a kind of patient firmness that needs no comment from the feet because it carries them so evenly. You follow no exact path now, though the movement remains easy. The line that first brought you in among the trees has loosened into something gentler. A clear way still exists where the ground is most naturally open, but it is no longer a path in the deliberate sense. It is simply the route your steps take through the spaces that present themselves. Between one trunk and the next, around a root that lifts a little too high, across a patch where the shade gathers more fully, then onward again. Nothing here resists you. The grove only asks that you move at its pace, and by now that pace feels less like something outside you, and more like the speed your body would have chosen on its own if no other part of the day had spoken first. The brightness beyond the trees still appears now, and then, but differently. It no longer stretches wide around you. It arrives in glimpses between trunks, in bright pieces far enough away that they seem flatter than before, as though the full force of the afternoon had remained outside while only its light was allowed to pass in. From where you are now, the open ground beyond the grove looks almost simplified. Pale, still, and without detail. It does not draw the eye in the same way. Nearer things have taken its place. The dry curve of bark at arm's reach, the pattern laid on the ground by leaves overhead, the slight difference between one patch of earth and the next, the way a space opens ahead and seems to hold itself ready without insisting. Your steps grow quieter, not because the ground has softened, but because your attention has come closer in. You do not need to look far ahead anymore. The grove gives enough from where you are. One trunk to pass, one opening beyond it, one patch of steadier shade a little farther on. The body is no longer measuring distance. It is moving by nearness now, by what each few steps offer, and then release. There is a particular ease in that. The mind does not have to keep the whole place in view. It can let the afternoon arrive in smaller portions. This tree, this stretch of ground, this quiet interval between branches, this dimmer place where the light touches less often. Somewhere above, a branch shifts just enough to alter the pattern at your feet. A length of shade narrows. A pale strip widens. Then both settle into a different arrangement, no more important than the last. The movement overhead is too light to call your full attention to it, but it keeps the grove from becoming fixed. Everything here seems capable of changing without ever becoming busy. That quality begins to enter you as you walk farther in, not stillness exactly, and not movement either, but a way of being held between the two. The faint hum beyond the trees goes on. Sometimes it seems a little clearer for a few moments, as though the angle between trunks has opened towards the hotter ground outside the grove, and allowed the sound to travel in more directly. Then another turn among the trees places more bark and shadow between you and the sunlit air, and the hum recedes again, becoming no more than a fine thread drawn along the edge of hearing. It never comes nearer than that. It belongs to the outer layer of the afternoon. The place you are in now keeps another kind of quiet, one not made from silence, but from distance, spacing, and the soft interruption of leaves. Ahead, the trunks stand a little wider apart. The ground between them looks smoother there, less interrupted by roots, with shade that lies in broader pieces and is broken less often by sudden brightness. You do not think of it as a destination. The feeling is simpler than that. The body recognizes a steadier part of the grove and inclines towards it in the same unforced way water might move towards a lower place in the land. One step follows another. Nothing in the movement is decisive. No choice announces itself. Yet slowly, without any formal moment of deciding, the direction becomes clear. You pass close to a tree on your left. Its trunk rises with a slight turn near the base, the bark dry and ridged where old growth has thickened upon itself over the years. The shade beneath it is narrow and moving, touched often by light. A little farther on, another tree holds its shadow differently, The leaves above set more thickly in one section so that the ground below looks quieter, more even in tone. The distinction is small, but the body notices it. Some places in the grove are for passing through, others are for remaining in. You do not need to say that to yourself in words. The knowledge settles lower than language, into the plain ease of continuing until the right kind of shade is reached. A few more steps, and the ground begins to answer that instinct. The surface here lies firmer and less broken underfoot. There are still root lines beneath the earth, but they do not rise as abruptly. The scattered fallen leaves are thinner in this patch, and the light comes through the branches in longer, quieter intervals. Nothing about it is arranged. Nothing has been prepared. It is only one natural part of the grove among many, yet it carries a slight gathered quality, as though the afternoon has been settling here more evenly for hours. The air itself feels steadier, not cooler in any sharp way, and not still enough to feel heavy, only more settled. The sort of air that has remained under branches long enough to take on the character of the place that holds it. When you breathe it in, the breath does not deepen the way it did at the grove's edge. It simply continues more quietly. No part of you is adjusting now. The earlier changes have already been made. What happens here is subtler. The body no longer notices itself adapting. It has already entered the grove's rhythm and is being carried by it without effort. The spaces between the trees begin to feel almost room-like, not enclosed, never enclosed, only distinct. One open patch receives a little more light and seems fitted to passing through. Another lies under steadier branches and holds a softer, more even shade. A third opens farther off, its ground brighter and less settled, useful to the eye for a moment, and then let go. The grove keeps offering these quiet variations, and the mind, instead of trying to map them, begins to accept them one by one as they come. This room of shade, then the next, this interval of trunks, then another. A place beneath the leaves where nothing is asked but notice, and even that soon becomes less effort than habit. You move towards the broad tree without ever having fully chosen it. It has simply continued to remain the truest place ahead. Seen now through one gap between trunks, then another, its base wider than those around it, its shadow steadier, its ground less interrupted. The bark catches only a little brightness on the outermost ridges, while the deeper folds keep their older, quieter tone. Around it, the earth appears gently held, as though years of shade have allowed the place to gather itself without disturbance. No single feature explains the sense of rightness. It comes from the way everything there belongs together: trunk, ground, branches, light. You angle slightly towards it. The movement is so small it hardly deserves to be called a turn. Yet after it, each next step makes the direction clearer. One lower branch extends outward above the ground nearby, not low enough to obstruct, only enough to deepen the shade beneath. The leaves above this part of the grove shift less restlessly. The light still moves through them, but with softer interruption, as though what reaches the earth here has traveled farther through branches before arriving. The brighter patches between trunks remain somewhere beyond, but they no longer divide the grove into light and dark. They sit at its edges while this place gathers itself in the center. The farther you come into it, the less there is to compare. Earlier, there had still been the memory of the path, the awareness of open heat, the skin remembering sunlight and measuring shade against it. Here, that measuring begins to fall away. The grove no longer feels like relief from something else. It feels complete in itself. The trunks are not interruptions in the day. The shade is not an answer to the brightness beyond. This held pocket of afternoon has become the primary thing, and the outer world reaches you only in softened remnants. A distant hum, a pale strip of openness between branches, the knowledge of sunlight resting somewhere past the trees. Your feet cross a smoother section of ground, not with any sharpened alertness, almost the reverse. The evenness of it lets attention rest more fully in the step itself and then move beyond stepping altogether. There is less to accommodate here. Less rising earth, less scattered debris, less visual interruption in the shade laid across the ground. The broad trunk is closer now. Its base has the thickened steadiness of age, and the space beside it carries that same gathered calm the eye had begun to trust from farther off. This is where the grove starts to narrow towards rest, not because the world becomes smaller, but because it becomes more sufficient. Nothing new is needed. No brighter opening between trunks, no different patch of shade, no better ground farther in. The movement that remains in you continues only because a few steps are still required. The place itself has already been found in everything but the simplest physical sense. You are nearly there. A leaf turns overhead and lets one pale flicker pass across the ground near your feet. It fades as quietly as it came. The trunk ahead keeps its calm. The shade around it stays broad and even. One root rises near the base and disappears again under the earth, not enough to trouble the space beside it, only enough to give the ground a gentle shape. The pattern above moves without asking to be watched. The air remains settled. The faint hum beyond the grove has thinned almost to nothing from where you stand now. And with the broad tree close before you, the smoother ground gathered in its shade, and the whole afternoon seeming to have drawn inward to this one unforced place beneath the olives, you come to the part of the day where walking gives way to choosing where to rest. Now that you are close to it, the broad tree no longer belongs to the grove in quite the same way as all the others. It has become a place in its own right. Its trunk rises from the earth with a steadiness that seems older at this distance than it did from farther off. The bark thickened and folded by years that have left no trace of strain in it, only shape. At the base, the tree widens before drawing upward, holding the ground around it in a manner so natural that the eye accepts it at once. Nothing about it appears arranged for comfort. Nothing has been improved or made ready in any deliberate way. Yet the earth beside it carries a settled quality that the body recognizes immediately, as though the shade here has been collecting itself patiently since morning and has had time enough to become complete. You come to a stop beside the trunk without needing to mark the moment when walking ends. The last few steps have already shortened. Their purpose has already thinned. By the time they are done, there is no sensation of arrival in the dramatic sense, only a gentle closing of movement around one exact patch of afternoon. The broad base of the olive tree stands close enough now that you could reach out and lay a hand against it without leaning. The bark carries pale light on its outer ridges and keeps deeper, cooler tones folded inward where the surface opens into older lines. Above, the branches gather the day into softer intervals. Below, the ground rests in a broader, steadier shade than the lighter places you passed on the way in. For a few quiet moments, you do nothing except remain there. The place does not need to be taken in all at once. Seen from here, the patch beside the tree is simple enough. A little smoother near one side of the trunk, a little more uneven where one root lifts and disappears again, a little darker where the shade remains longer, paler where filtered light still finds the earth in narrow strips. There are a few fallen olive leaves, each one thin and curled in its own small way, and finer dry fragments gathered, so lightly that they do not clutter the ground, but only show that the day has been passing here for hours before you arrived. The surface is not soft. It does not need to be soft. It only needs to be trustworthy, and that quality is already present in it. You let your gaze move once across the patch, the way the body itself seems to move through such decisions when it is no longer in a hurry, not searching, not comparing one imagined arrangement with another, only noting what is here. The shallow rise made by the root, the firmer section where the earth lies flatter, the spread of shade that reaches broadly enough to hold the whole resting place without interruption. The way the brighter pieces overhead arrive already softened, broken by enough branch and leaf that they lose their insistence before they touch the ground. There is no perfect angle to be found, and that is part of the ease of it. The place asks for acceptance, not improvement. One foot shifts a little nearer the trunk. From there, the ground's shape becomes clearer through the body rather than the eye. The soles of your feet register the difference between the flatter patch and the slight contour beside it. The earth is compacted enough to feel reliable, yet still natural in its surface, holding the memory of roots beneath it and the long, dry afternoon above it without becoming hard in any forbidding way. The shade cools the appearance of it more than its actual temperature. Warmth remains in the upper layer of the day, in the held air, in the cloth you are about to bring down, in your own skin from the bright path outside the grove. But here the earth is released from the full exposure of noon. It keeps a calmer measure. The blanket is brought down and unfolded. Its first movement is quiet and direct, the weight of it leaving your hands and dropping into the place it is meant to occupy. Then the fold opens, and the woven length spreads itself over the patch of ground, not all at once flat, but easily enough that it begins to take the shape beneath it almost immediately. One corner settles first where the earth lies smoothest. Another rides lightly over the low rise made by the root below. The cloth does not disguise what is under it. It acknowledges it. That is the best kind of resting surface for a place like this. Not something that tries to replace the ground, only something that makes meeting it easier. You lower one hand to the nearest edge and draw it outward a little, not carefully, only enough to let the blanket open fully into its own size and lie without tension. The woven texture catches a little filtered brightness, then releases it again when the branch shadow shifts. The threads themselves have the plain usefulness of something made to be handled often rather than admired, and once they are spread across the earth, they quiet the patch further, not by changing its character, but by adding one recognizable human measure among the older forms already there. Bark, root, soil, fallen leaf held shade. A second small movement of the hand smooths a fold near the middle. That is enough. The cloth already understands the ground better than continued arranging would help it to. It settles over the slight contour and accepts the steadier flatness nearby. Along one section, it lies close and even. Along another, it keeps the gentlest rise where the earth beneath asks it to. You can see from this alone how the body will later meet it. One part supported more firmly, one part receiving that low natural shape, everything held plainly by what lies under the woven surface instead of pretending to float above it. For a moment, you remain half bent over the blanket, not in labor, not in concentration, only in closeness to what has just been made ready. From this angle, the broad trunk seems larger, though not imposing. It stands beside the patch with the kind of calm that belongs only to things that have remained where they are through many seasons, and no longer need to prove their steadiness. The bark's folded surface holds both dryness and age in equal measure. Near the base, a line of old growth thickens slightly before disappearing into the ground, and the shade it casts along the edge of the blanket gives the whole resting place a sense of being sheltered not overhead only, but also beside. You straighten slowly and take in the patch again. Now it is no longer simply a likely place beneath a tree. It is beginning to become your place in the afternoon. The woven blanket lies over the earth as though it had always meant to rest there. The slight rise under one side gives it shape without disturbing its usefulness. The flatter portion keeps the center of the patch broad and even. Around it, the ground remains visible enough that the resting place feels part of the grove rather than separate from it. There is no border beyond the simplest one, cloth laid upon earth. That is enough to create intimacy. The folded linen for your head is brought down next. Its movement is smaller than the blankets, and for that reason more personal. You bend again, lower it to the steadier end of the patch, and place it where the ground gives the clearest support. Not too near the trunk, not too far from it, not in the brightest reach of the filtered light, and not in the dimmest part either. Only where the body will naturally come to rest with the tree's presence near at one side, the blanket beneath, and the wider shade held gently overhead. The linen keeps its fold. You adjust it once with the side of your hand so that its thickness lies where it will matter most. The fabric itself is plain, carrying no softness beyond what folded cloth can honestly give. That is enough. A little lift for the head, a little easing between skull and ground. Nothing more. It does not try to imitate an indoor pillow or bring the logic of a room into the grove. It remains exactly what it is, a small practical kindness laid upon woven cloth over earth. That single addition changes the feeling of the patch immediately. Until this moment, the place has offered suitability. Shade, ground, nearness to the trunk, a steadier quality than the surrounding spaces. Now it offers rest in a form the body can recognize before contact begins. The blanket marks the length of where you will soon lie. The linen names the place where your head will come down. Without any excessive preparation, the grove has taken on a human outline. Not enough to disturb its natural quiet, only enough to invite your weight into it. You pause there once more, standing over the made place. The eye notices what it no longer needs to question: the fuller shade across the upper half of the blanket, the quieter filtered light lower down, the small root shape beneath the cloth, still visible in a soft rise and then gone. The way the bark at the edge gives back no sharp brightness, only a muted reflection along the outer ridges. Above, the leaves continue to turn in small responses to the day, but nothing in their movement asks for attention beyond this one registering glance. A hand lowers again, this time more slowly, and comes to rest on the blanket where the linen will not be. The cloth feels warm from the held air beneath the branches, though not hot. Beneath that first warmth, the truth of the earth is immediate and reassuring. The firmness is unmistakable, but so is the way the woven surface receives the hand first and mediates that contact without falsifying it. The slight contour from the root remains present under the palm, enough to be known, not enough to resist. When you let a little more pressure go through the hand, the ground answers in the plain, steady manner of something that has no wish to be anything other than what it is. You leave your hand there for another moment, not testing, only learning the tone of the place before the body meets it more fully. The blanket softens edges and dry texture, but the structure below remains honest. That honesty is a comfort in itself. A place like this does not need to persuade you that it will hold you well. It simply will. The tree has been standing over this patch all day. The shade has remained. The ground has kept its shape. The cloth rests where it has been laid. Each part of the resting place is already doing exactly what it should, and because of that, the body is freed from asking further questions. You lift your hand and let it fall still by your side. Around you, the grove remains open and lightly spaced, but the openness means something different now than it did while you were still moving through it. Then it was a series of rooms to pass between. Here, beside the broad trunk, it has become a surrounding quiet in which one center has been formed. The brighter spaces farther out among the trees continue to exist, but they no longer compete with this patch of shade. They belong to the edges of the afternoon. This belongs to its held middle. The faint hum beyond the denser shade has thinned almost completely from where you stand. What remains nearest is simpler than sound. The broad-rooted calm of the tree beside you, the cloth laid upon the earth, the filtered light that reaches down in softened intervals, the stillness of the prepared place waiting without impatience. No single element insists on itself. That is what makes the whole patch feel so sufficient. It has no performance in it, nothing decorative, nothing heightened, only suitability, plain and complete. You could still continue farther into the grove. That possibility remains technically open, and because it remains open, it can now be let go fully. There are other trees beyond this one, other pieces of shade, other levels of ground where a blanket might also be spread. But the thought no longer reaches the body. It arrives only in the mind for a moment, then fades because comparison has lost its use. The broad tree, the steadier patch of earth, the blanket, the folded linen, the filtered pattern above, together they have closed the question. The practical part of choosing is over. What stands before you now is not an option among others, but a resting place already made true. Another small change passes over the blanket as the leaves above turn and settle again. A narrow strip of pale light touches one edge of the woven cloth, then softens and breaks apart. The linen remains exactly where you placed it. The low shape of the root continues beneath the blanket in its quiet curve. The bark beside you keeps its broad, folded stillness. There is nothing left to arrange and nothing left to improve. You stand for one final moment in the gathered shade with the place now fully prepared. Not deciding, not delaying, only present with the old olive tree close at hand, the blanket lying over firm earth, the linen fold waiting where your head will soon come to rest, and the whole afternoon seeming to have narrowed itself gently into this one exact patch beneath the branches. And there, with the grove no longer a place to move through, but a resting place made ready beneath one broad tree, the day becomes simple enough at last for lying down. You begin to lower yourself without disturbing the gathered quiet beneath the tree. One hand comes down first, touching the blanket where the woven cloth lies smoothest over the earth. The contact is simple and immediate, warm from the held air beneath the branches, but beneath that first surface warmth, the steadiness of the ground is already there, unmistakable even through the weave. Your knees bend. Weight leaves standing gradually and passes into the hand that has found the cloth. Nothing in the movement feels ceremonial. It is only the ordinary, careful kindness a body gives itself when it is about to come to rest somewhere it already trusts. One knee follows. The blanket receives it, then the firmer truth beneath answers through the layers without sharpness. Only with that plain honesty the patch has carried from the moment you first looked down at it. The cloth softens the dry texture of the earth. It does not pretend to replace it. The low shape of the root remains present under one section, enough to give contour, not enough to interrupt the movement. Your other hand comes down as well, and for a few quiet seconds your weight is divided between hand, knee, hand, and foot, the body still partly vertical, partly committed to the ground, halfway between standing and rest. At this closer level, the patch beside the broad trunk seems to draw in around the body more fully, not by narrowing, only by becoming more exact. The trunk is no longer something seen among other trunks. It is the old, folded steadiness close beside you. The blanket is no longer part of a prepared place. It is the surface under your hand and knee. The earth is no longer something assessed by sight. It is already speaking through pressure and shape. Your attention, without effort, leaves the wider grove and gathers itself into this one immediate field of contact. You turn gradually towards the place that has already been made for lying down. The movement is small enough to feel like continuation rather than choice. One hip begins to descend. Weight shifts through the bracing arm and knee, then passes more fully into the side of the body as the woven cloth meets you first, and the ground beneath follows with its deeper answer. The blanket gives only a little, and what it gives is not softness exactly, but easing, a first reception, a gentling of the dry surface, a layer that lets the body meet the earth without abrasion while still feeling the earth's structure clearly below it. The side of the hip and the upper thigh are the first places to understand the arrangement completely. There, the body learns what kind of rest this will be. One part of you meets the flatter section of the patch and recognizes at once the broad, reliable support it offers. Another rests over the gentler rise where the root moves under the earth and disappears again. The difference between those two conditions is easy to feel, but it does not divide the place into comfort and discomfort. It gives the resting ground its shape. The body accepts that shape quickly because it is plain and consistent. Nothing unexpected waits in it. Nothing needs correcting. You lower farther. The longer line of the side body begins to come down in quiet stages, the waist feeling the ground through the blanket next, then the lower ribs drawing closer while one forearm still bears a little of the descent. The movement slows naturally here, not from uncertainty, but because every body has a last few moments in which it reads the surface it is about to trust completely. The side nearest the ground begins to recognize the continuity of support, not one point alone, but a broad heldness running from thigh through hip and waist towards the ribs, changing slightly where the contour lifts and flattening again where the patch is steadier. The old olive tree remains just beyond the edge of contact. You do not touch it, and yet its presence matters. The trunk's broad stillness seems to extend into the patch itself, lending the ground beside it a certain authority. It is as if the body understands, without needing to phrase it, that this is earth that has been held in one pattern of shade for a long time, ground that has not been disturbed by hurry or repeated use. The steadiness beside the tree is not made, it is accumulated. At last, the shoulder begins to descend. That is the moment when the body stops merely approaching rest and starts to enter it. The blanket softens the first meeting. The earth answers beneath. One shoulder finds the flatter part of the patch more directly than the hip did, while the side of the torso still registers the quieter rise elsewhere. The body's weight begins to spread instead of staying concentrated in the points that first came down. With that spreading, the support becomes more believable, more whole. Not a series of separate contacts, but one ground holding the side of you in different but related ways. Your head remains lifted for another moment while the hand nearest the linen guides its lowering. Then the folded cloth receives it. The linen does not offer softness in the indoor sense. It offers something better for this place. A little lift, a little easing, a little plain separation between skull and earth. The back of the head settles. The fold keeps its shape. The neck follows, and with that one completion, the arrangement begins to declare itself as a whole. Woven blanket under the larger weight of the body, folded linen under the head, firm earth beneath both, broad shade overhead, trunk presence beside. There is no luxury in it. There is no need for luxury. Everything here has crossed into sufficiency. For a few moments, though, you are not yet fully given over. One arm still takes a little weight. One knee remains slightly more bent than the other. The chest is not holding itself up exactly, but neither has it fully released its last trace of readiness. These seconds matter. They are not hesitation. They are the body's final reading of the place through actual contact rather than expectation. The elbow bears lightly into the blanket. The shoulder tests its angle without moving much. The side of the waist learns how the contour under the patch changes once the upper body is down as well. The longer leg begins to extend more fully along the woven surface. Each small perception is absorbed almost at once, not turned into analysis, only folded into the body's growing certainty about where it is. You become aware, too, of how the warmth of the day has changed now that you are on the ground. Standing, it had rested directly on shoulders, face, arms, and the upper body exposed to the bright path, and then the grove. Here it gathers differently. A mild held warmth remains in the cloth, in the shaded air under the branches, and in your own skin from the sun you carried in with you. Beneath that upper layer, the earth keeps another measure altogether, firmer, steadier, less touched by the moving brightness overhead. The body lies between those two conditions, warmth above and around support below. Neither overstates itself. Together they make rest easier to understand. Then comes the one true adjustment the place requires. It is small but clear. The shoulder eases a fraction farther, and the arm beneath it shifts out from bearing the body's remaining caution, so the chest can settle more openly. At almost the same moment, the knee that had stayed slightly gathered lengthens more fully along the blanket, letting the hip find a broader relation to the ground's shape. The two movements belong together. They are less like separate decisions than like one line of the body quietly correcting itself from neck to waist to thigh. When they are done, the change is unmistakable, not dramatic, not transformed, only final. The body has found the position it was moving towards from the instant the first hand touched the woven cloth. After that, the arm no longer needs to support anything. It rests easily, and with its release, something quiet passes through the rest of the body as well. The ribs stop hovering in that nearly undetectable way they had before. The side of the waist no longer holds back a fraction of its own weight. The hip settles without keeping any part of itself ready for revision. The head yields more honestly into the linen fold. The neck no longer carries the memory of standing. These are not fresh adjustments. They are the natural consequence of the one that mattered. The place has moved from arranged to inhabited. The blanket answers the settled weight differently now than it did during the descent. Before, it was surface. Now it becomes continuity. The woven fibers no longer present themselves as texture alone. They become the first quiet layer through which the whole resting place is felt. Cloth, then earth, cloth following contour, earth keeping form. The body no longer meets these as separate facts each time attention touches them. It begins to feel them together, as one broad support with subtle variation inside it. Above you, the leaves continue their faint turning. A softened pattern of light shifts once across the lower part of one arm and along the blanket near your knees before moving on again. From lying here, that movement belongs to a different order of experience than it did while you were standing. It is not something you pass through now. It belongs to the place that is holding you. The filtered light reaches the body already quieted by branch and leaf and distance. Its motion feels less like change than like the afternoon continuing in the only way it knows how. The trunk beside you remains close enough to orient the body without asking to be looked at. It gives the patch an edge, but not a boundary. A near steadiness rather than an enclosure. The body registers it in the same quiet way it registers the linen under the head and the contour under the side, not as an object demanding notice, but as one part of the arrangement that makes the whole patch feel secure. Beyond the trunk, beyond the body, the grove stays open and lightly spaced, yet from here that openness has lost any relation to movement. It is simply the quiet extent of the place around you. One last trace of effort reveals itself only because there is now so little of it left. The chin settles a fraction differently. The hand nearest the blanket loosens, no longer shaped by even the smallest readiness. The chest finds a calmer rhythm where the supported side beneath it has stopped requiring negotiation. No further improvement suggests itself. No part of the body sends up a request to move again. The patch has said what kind of holding it offers, and the body, which is always wiser about rest than thought knows how to be, has accepted the terms completely. There is relief in that, though not the bright, first relief of stepping out of full sunlight and under the trees. This is lower and quieter. It is the relief of no longer being in conversation with the surface beneath you. The place has stopped being possibility. It has become fact. Hip, waist, ribs, shoulder, head, leg, each part has found its relation to woven cloth, folded linen, and earth. Nothing remains under review. Even the slight rise beneath one section of you, so visible while standing over the blanket, has now ceased to appear as a separate detail. Accepted, it belongs to the whole support. It no longer asks to be named. The faint hum beyond the denser shade still exists somewhere outside the resting place, but from here it reaches you only as a thread drawn along the far edge of hearing. Nearer than that is the simpler language of contact. The woven cloth under the side of the body, the plain lift of linen under the head, the firm ground carrying everything without strain, the mild held warmth in the air beneath the branches, the old trunk beside you, broad and folded and still. These are the things nearest now, and because they are so plain, they are also sufficient. That becomes clear not through revelation, but through the sudden uselessness of motion. Moving again would not improve anything. Another adjustment would only repeat what has already been learned. The blanket has taken the shape it needs. The linen lies exactly where it should. The earth beneath has proved itself. And the body, which has always known more about lying down than language can explain, finds there is nothing left to ask for. You lie beneath the olive tree with your full weight given over at last. The shoulder does not hover. The hip does not search for a flatter answer. The head carries none of itself. The arm nearest the blanket rests without purpose. The longer line of the body settles into its own quiet extension. Above, the filtered light continues in soft pieces. Around you, the shaded air remains calm and held. Beside you, the old trunk keeps its broad, folded stillness. Beneath you, the earth receives everything without strain and without effort. And there, with woven cloth over firm ground, folded linen under your head, one small adjustment already made, and no better position anywhere waiting to be discovered, the body learns the simplest truth the grove can offer, that the ground is enough. Lying beneath the olive tree, you begin to know the grove in a different way than you could while walking through it or standing above the blanket. It is no longer arranged before you as a place with trunks and openings and patches of shade. It reaches you instead through what falls upon the resting place and what remains just beyond it. The first thing to become clear in this quieter way is the movement of the light, not the brightness of the day in its larger form, not the open sun you left behind on the pale path, but the gentler motion that arrives here after passing through branch and leaf and distance. It touches the blanket in a shifting pattern too soft-edged to be called sharp, too continuous to be called separate moments. One patch of dim brightness rests along the woven cloth near your knees for a while, then narrows until it is no longer the same shape. A lighter piece brushes the lower edge of one sleeve, then passes on. Across the closed lids, there is only the faintest change in tone, a warm, dim registering of light that moves without declaring itself important. From here, the leaves above do not need to be imagined in detail for their motion to be understood. Their work is visible in what reaches you. A soft interruption crossing the blanket, a pale shifting through the warmth behind your eyelids, a brief widening of light near the hand that rests without purpose against the woven cloth. then another arrangement, no more meaningful than the first. The body does not answer any of it. That is what has changed. Earlier, movement belonged partly to you. Steps, turning, lowering, the small practical acts of choosing, preparing, settling. Now, movement belongs almost entirely to the grove itself. Leaves respond to the day overhead. Light follows their answer. The pattern falls where it falls. Beneath it, the body remains where it has already come to rest, receiving what reaches it without needing to take part. The blanket, too, begins to feel different in this stage of stillness. Earlier, it had been surface, then preparation, then the first easing between the body and the earth below. Now it becomes less an object than the nearest layer of the resting place itself. The woven texture is still there, where the hand or forearm can feel it, but it no longer presents itself as texture alone. It has taken the contour of the ground completely enough that cloth and earth seem to speak through one another. The blanket follows the low rise beneath one part of you and lies flatter under another. But because the body is no longer adjusting, these variations cease to call for notice each time they are felt. They are absorbed into the larger fact of being held. Above and around this nearness, the afternoon continues in a farther register. That wider day has not gone away. It remains beyond the denser shade, resting over open ground, warming the pale path, lying broad across the places between the grove and the sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the tree's immediate keeping, the heat still belongs to exposed earth and bright stone, and air more fully given to the sun. The faint hum that drifts in from time to time still belongs to that outer layer as well. It comes from where the day is less interrupted, less filtered, less gathered into these held pockets beneath the branches. But from where you lie, that outer day feels arranged at a distance. Its warmth reaches the grove only in moderated form. Its sound arrives already thinned. Its brightness appears not as a field surrounding you, but as softened reminders between trunks, light held farther off than the body has any reason to follow. The resting place beneath the tree has become the center now, and what lies beyond it, though still part of the same afternoon, has lost its claim on your full attention. This makes the shade feel different as well. No longer simply relief, no longer contrast. It becomes the condition in which the body now exists, held overhead in leaves and branches, held beside you in the trunk's broad stillness, held below in the earth that has kept one steady measure from the moment you first lowered yourself onto it. Even the warmth that remains with you is shaped by this. It does not come down from above in the direct way it did on the path. It lingers instead in the shaded air, in the blanket, in your own skin, where the earlier sun has left a mild memory of itself. Around that warmth, there is another feeling entirely. The calmer, firmer answer of the ground below, always present, always the same. The faint hum beyond the grove returns for a little while, then thins again. It never comes close enough to become a center. It reminds you, if only faintly, that the open day still continues outside the tree's shade and beyond the resting patch. Yet each time it reaches you from that distance, it defines the stillness here more clearly by not belonging to it. The body lies within another order of the afternoon now, one made less from sound than from spacing, from filtered light, from the simple sufficiency of cloth over earth under leaves. The hum remains outside the center. It belongs to brightness. You belong here. Nothing in the grove changes quickly enough to divide one moment cleanly from the next. This, too, becomes more noticeable the longer you lie still. The leaf shadow does not leap, it drifts. The dim glow through closed eyelids does not brighten and darken in any pattern worth following. It shifts by degrees too small to reward the effort of measurement. The held warmth in the shaded air does not arrive or leave. it remains. The earth below does not vary at all. Because of that, the mind has less and less reason to keep track of where one passing moment gives way to another. It is not that time disappears. It is only that nothing in the resting place insists upon being marked. No event separates itself sharply enough from the quiet continuance around it. The afternoon beneath the olive tree offers no edges bold enough to demand counting. A lighter piece of filtered sun crosses somewhere near the edge of the blanket. You could notice it if you wished to. You could follow its slow retreat as a branch settles differently above. But the movement has already become the sort of thing that can be half known without being attended to fully. It reaches the resting place. It changes the tone of one small patch. It passes on. The body remains as it was before. The cloth beneath you remains what it was before. Even the eyelids do not need to decide whether the dimness behind them is warmer or less warm than it was a few moments ago. The change is too slight. The effort of following it would produce nothing useful. This is how time begins to loosen here, not through forgetting where you are, not through dreams arriving yet, only through the loss of anything worth actively tracking. The grove does not offer sequence, so much as continuance. One arrangement of shade becomes another without either one establishing itself as a moment to be preserved. A sound at the edge of hearing appears, then returns to distance. The body's contact with the ground remains constant enough that it no longer renews itself as information each time attention brushes against it. Lying here, you begin to rest not only from movement, but from the quiet habit of sorting one small change from the next. What lies nearest becomes simpler. The linen under your head, for example, was easy to notice at first as folded cloth, as a small practical kindness, as a layer different from the blanket beneath the rest of you. Now it begins to belong to the larger support more fully. Its plain lift remains. The easing it gives the head and neck remains. But it is no longer encountered as a separate object each time awareness touches it. It joins with the woven cloth below, the ground beneath that, the side of the body given over to stillness, and the air held under the branches, until all of it is felt more as one arrangement than several. The trunk beside you has changed in the same way. Earlier it had been a thing approached, then chosen, then stood beside while the resting place was prepared. Now its importance no longer depends on being noticed directly. It is present in the patch as steadiness, in the edge it gives the place, in the way the body's orientation rests more securely because something broad and rooted remains near without pressing close. The tree does not need to be described each time it is felt. Its bark, its folds, its age have already done their work. What remains now is its quiet participation in the resting field around you. The same is true of the root's low contour under one part of the blanket. Accepted, it stops presenting itself separately. When you first stood above the patch, it was something to account for. When you first lowered yourself, it was something to understand through contact. Now it has ceased to matter as an individual feature at all. It belongs to the shape of the ground in the same way the flatter section belongs to the shape of the ground. Both have been taken into the whole support. They no longer divide it. The more still the body remains, the less separate the resting place becomes. Blanket following earth, linen supporting head, ground carrying side, hip, ribs, shoulder, leg, trunk presence beside, shade above, held warmth in the air, filtered light moving across what lies under the leaves. At first, these can all be named. Then they begin to belong together, so quietly that naming them starts to feel unnecessary. Not because anything has vanished, because nothing is asking to stand apart. A branch turns somewhere overhead, and through the eyelids the dimness changes by a shade, so small it can barely be called a change at all. This is perhaps the clearest sign that the grove has become one continuous condition around you, Even what shifts remains inside the same calm. Light moves but does not disturb. The distant hum returns but does not enter. Warmth lingers but does not press. Support stays constant but no longer needs to be confirmed. The whole resting place has begun to hold together in a way that leaves less and less for thought to sort. There is no practical noticing left now. That stage has passed. The body is not checking whether the shoulder has remained well placed. It is not considering the linen. It is not revisiting the patch beneath the hip to see whether another angle might improve it. All of that ended when the position became true. What remains is not problem solving, not even preference, only the broad continuation of a place that has already proved sufficient. The hand resting near your side does not carry hidden readiness in it. The head does not prepare to lift. The longer line of the body does not keep any part of itself back from the ground. The old need to monitor comfort has faded because comfort no longer stands on trial. The outer day continues beyond this, as all days do. Open ground lies in light. Stone keeps warmth. Air shimmers faintly where the sun remains unbroken. The path is still there somewhere between the trunks, pale and quiet, and far less interesting now than it was when you first approached the grove. All this continues, yet it continues without pulling at you. The distance between that outer layer and this inner resting place is no longer measured by steps. It is measured by relevance. What happens out there matters less, and less because the body no longer needs anything from it. The shaded patch beside the tree has become complete enough in itself that the rest of the afternoon, though still present, is reduced to softened context. You lie closer now to a state in which even difference begins to lose its usefulness. Difference still exists. The earth below remains firmer than the held air above. The filtered light remains lighter than the shade through which it passes. The outer day remains warmer and more exposed than the patch beneath the tree. But keeping these things apart with the old sharpness costs more effort than it returns. The body does not need the distinctions in the same way anymore. They remain available, yet no longer necessary. The longer you stay with the resting place as it is, the more each boundary softens into the larger field that contains it. This is especially true behind the closed eyes. There, the day no longer appears as brightness and shade in any clean division. It becomes variations within one warm dimness. A slightly paler wash when the leaves shift, a quieter depth when they settle again, nothing that asks to be judged, nothing that calls for the eyes to open and clarify it. The world reaches you already softened enough that not knowing its exact arrangement has become one of the comforts of lying here. The body beneath that dimness remains as it has been for some time now, fully given over, no part of it braced, no part of it half withheld. Because of that, the grove's continuance no longer feels like something happening around a separate self, so much as something within which you are already included. The blanket is not under you in one isolated sense while the air is around you in another. The trunk is not merely beside you while the shade is merely above. These relations still exist, but they have entered one another. The whole patch has drawn close into one held reality, and lying within it asks less and less from language or thought. Another slow passage of leaf shadow crosses the blanket. Another faint return of the hum from far outside the denser shade reaches the edge of hearing, and then withdraws again. Another slight warming in the dimness behind closed eyes arrives and passes. Yet none of these now establishes itself firmly enough to count as a fresh beginning. They are continuations within the same field, variations that no longer make separate claims. What had once been noticed one by one begins to stay together. The cloth under your hand and side, the steady answer of the earth beneath it, the folded linen receiving the head, the broad-rooted presence beside you, the air under the leaves. the filtered light touching the resting place without insistence, the farther afternoon remaining beyond the center of shade, all of it held in one low, unhurried condition. By now, there is almost nothing left to improve and almost nothing left to sort. The body has no wish to move. The mind has less and less appetite for arranging one sensation against another. The old habit of keeping track, of whether the light has shifted, of whether the hum is nearer or farther, of whether one part of the support differs from another, thins not because attention fails, but because the distinctions themselves have become less useful than the whole they belong to. The grove does not ask to be understood in pieces anymore. It is easier to let it remain one thing. And there, with the resting place now held not as trunk and cloth and earth and shade separately, but as one continuous condition beneath the olive branches, the afternoon reaches the edge of another quiet change. The point at which difference still remains, yet no longer needs to be followed. By now, the distinctions that once helped the body understand the resting place have begun to lose their value. They have not vanished. The ground is still the ground. The shaded air is still the shaded air. The filtered light still moves in its patient way through the leaves above. The day beyond the grove still continues somewhere outside the trees' held circle of afternoon. But none of these now asks to be kept apart with the same care as before. The body no longer needs those separate recognitions in order to remain where it is. Support has already been accepted. Shade has already done its work. The resting place has already gathered itself into one continuous condition. What remains is quieter than any earlier part of the day. Not another change of place, not another stage of settling, only the slow release of difference from the need to be followed. Behind your closed eyes, the world has become simpler, not blank, not dark in any finished or absolute sense, only a warm dimness that contains slight variation without offering any edge sharp enough to matter. From time to time, something overhead shifts, and that dimness alters by a degree too small to name fully. A paler warmth passes through it for a little while, then lessens. The tone deepens again, though not as a separate event, only as part of the same held field continuing under the leaves. Nothing in it asks for clarification. Nothing invites the eyes to open and sort the arrangement of branch from light from shade. The world reaches you already softened enough that exactness has become unnecessary. The world no longer needs to be seen clearly in order to remain trustworthy. The patch beneath the olive tree has reached that point now. The blanket beneath you is no longer encountered as woven cloth here, earth there, contour beneath one section, and flatter support beneath another. Those truths remain, but as truths absorbed rather than inspected. The linen under your head does the same. The tree remains beside you. The air remains held under the branches. The filtered light continues overhead. None of it needs to step forward alone. The whole resting place has become sufficient enough to let its parts recede. You lie within that sufficiency without effort. Earlier, even in comfort, some small part of the self remained involved in the process of arriving there. A hand came down, a shoulder adjusted, a knee lengthened, the head found the linen. But now the need to participate has diminished almost entirely. Rest no longer feels like something being achieved. It feels like a condition already present, one in which the body is included whether it thinks about that inclusion or not. Above, the leaves continue their faint turning. They do not stop because you stop following them. Once or twice, that motion reaches the body as a soft change in the dim warmth behind the eyelids, or as a slightly altered tone on the blanket where one hand lies still. Then the alteration passes into continuance again. No conclusion comes with it. No meaning attaches itself to one pattern more than another. The grove keeps moving in the only way it knows. and the listener no longer has any need to keep pace with it. The farther afternoon is still present, but very faintly now, somewhere beyond the denser shade where the broader day still rests over open ground and pale path and warmed stone. Yet from here its presence is reduced to the slightest remainder, softened by distance, and irrelevance until it feels less like another place than like the memory of one. What lies nearest is enough. What lies farther off no longer competes. There is very little left for attention to do with any of it. Not because attention has failed, because the resting place has become too complete to require management. If a lighter piece of filtered sun passes somewhere near the lower edge of the blanket, it passes. If the dimness behind the eyes warms a little and then eases again, it eases. If the leaves overhead continue in their soft, slow answering of the afternoon, they continue. None of these now establishes itself as the beginning of something new. The grove has become too continuous for that. It keeps changing without becoming eventful. There is a kind of ease that comes only after the body has stopped not only moving, but soaring. This is that ease. What had been distinct becomes continuous. What had been followed becomes allowed. What had been named becomes quietly present without needing a name at all. The olive grove continues in its patient way above and around you. A leaf turns, another settles. A softened change moves through the dimness behind your eyelids, then another, too small to be compared with the first. Yet the effort of keeping any of these in relation has thinned almost completely away. The resting place is not asking to be understood now, only inhabited. The body inhabits it by remaining, no more than that. Somewhere overhead, the leaves continue to move in their almost untrackable way. Not a change to follow, not a cue, only proof that the grove remains alive in the same patient measure, whether you attend to it or not. Its motion is now part of the background from which no foreground needs to rise. It can continue without being counted, without being translated into thought, and the listener can drift beyond the point where continuing must be noticed. The dimness behind the eyes grows less like dimness and more like one unbroken field, warm dark, held, without edge worth naming. Here, beneath the tree, within blanket and linen and earth, and shade grown continuous, there is only the steadiness that remains when the need to follow has fallen away. The grove keeps the afternoon. The leaves keep their slow turning. The earth keeps its plain support. The shade keeps its held measure under the branches. There is no need to mark where one kind of stillness becomes another. No need to know whether the last faint awareness of light behind the eyelids is warmer now than it was a few moments ago, or whether the leaves have shifted again, or whether the broader day beyond the grove has changed at all. Those questions belong to a sharper wakefulness than the one now left to you. The olive tree stands. The resting place remains. The afternoon continues in its slow and patient way. And as the leaves keep turning softly overhead, without hurry, and without any need to be followed further, the grove goes on holding the day while you drift past the point of needing to notice that it does.